Uh, Working moms, I have a special treat for you today. My client Stephanie has come on the podcast to talk about regaining her sense of self and creating a playbook to feel more joy and balance in her life. As a mom that has raised two children during the pandemic, as well as managing a promotion at work at the same time, Stephanie shares her coaching journey that helped her to live life on her terms. Anyone that has experienced the motherhood identity crisis or has struggled with the intersection of motherhood paired with career advancement, you're going to want to take a listen to this interview. You ready, working moms? Let's get to it. Working moms, I am so excited today. I have a past client of mine, Stefanie, that has agreed to join us and talk about her journey through coaching, talk about some of the key lessons she learned. And I asked her, as we were prepping for this call today, what do you think working moms out there really need to hear that you learned through the process of coaching? Like, what nuggets of wisdom can we give them? And she came up with so many wonderful things. I'm just really excited to have her here. So thank you for being here, Stefanie.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just start with, tell us a little bit about yourself just so we can get, a baseline of who you are and how you came to coaching ultimately.
Yeah, for sure. So, yes, I'm Stephanie. Rebecca and I worked together about a year ago, or started working together, I should say, about a year ago. And I am a designer by trade. And so I've worked in the design industry in a variety of roles for now about, 15 years. And I'm really reaching that inflection point that I think through working with Rebecca, I have realized is a widespread phenomenon, not just for myself, but for women everywhere of,
Yes.
this confluence of your career taking off kind of at the same time as, you know, your young family might be starting. So with that, I have two kids. Their ages are 3 and 6. And I think, with all of those things coming together in a perfect storm, along with a global pandemic, then that is kind of
Yeah.
what led me to ultimately seeking out and finding Rebecca to work with.
Yeah, I love it. And so funny that you just talked about like that intersection of career advancement and motherhood. An episode I just recorded it is going to come out talking about that and all of the statistics around that. Like this is like a crazy it's just wild to me how these two things coincide and then all of the challenges that we face because these two things coincide at the same time, right? It's like our career takes off, we're given all these opportunities, and we've got young kids at home that are vying for our attention and need our energy and all the things, right? You came to coaching and you had two really specific goals in mind. And the first one was like you called it regaining your sense of self. And you could tell us a little bit about what you mean by that. The second one was also the way you framed it was recreating a playbook for your life so that you can really maintain work life balance. Tell us about those two goals and why those were important to you.
I think I'll even start with the second one, actually, as it relates so much to that intro, the lovely intro that you just gave. But this idea that I think we talked about a lot in coaching as well. And I think kind of helped me reach this insight of, uh, I had been following this playbook, I think, for a long time as like a high achieving academic, well rounded community member, trying to contribute to all of the things and, high achievement, I guess, through all of the standard ways by which our society kind of typically values, and really chasing that, I think, hard through high school and college and graduate
Yeah.
school and, career ladder, et cetera. And so then you have kids and like, what are you supposed to do with that playbook moving forward? And I think that was something that we talked about was really like, why should I assume that that playbook that I've been living my life by thus far was going to help me get to this next phase, of what I really wanted?
We're going to go with this analogy of sports. It's like you had a football playbook, but now the game is baseball. It's like those moves and those strategies aren't going to work in a different game, right?
Totally, totally. And like you have now trained your default behaviors, I think, to follow, some of those plays by this point of like, this is what it means to do well at work or to, yeah, be like chasing that next thing, whether or not you're, goal oriented or not. It's just like kind of a default behavior at that point. And I think I'd come to realize really that, like, quite immediately, actually, there's a big priority shift. Like, once you have
Yeah.
children and like the desire to be present and to like really, instill everything that you want within their childhood, that, you want to make sure that I'm going to re-say that, but like, I guess, upon having kids, like you suddenly kind of have this like very immediate priority shift and an understanding that, things need to change in order to fit those priorities, but there's not really as clear of a societal path, I would say, for like, what are women supposed to do now, as they have finally achieved all the things that they have sought out to achieve. But also, by the way, none of that is as important now. You have this family to build and to grow. So I think a lot of that led to this second goal that you mentioned of just like recognizing that whatever I was doing and like the plays that I was running, I guess at this point in my life, were not making me feel balanced whatsoever. Like I was feeling like I was really off kilter, trying to do maybe too much of too many things and really not knowing like where to optimize and focus my energy to better take care of myself. So I think that was one thing. But I think, kind of coinciding along that, and maybe, you could think of that as maybe all of the more like external and visible symptoms of like feeling imbalanced or, the activities I was engaging in or where I was putting in my time. But I think internally, I was having a bit of a crisis as well that speaks more to that first goal of, really recognizing that like I had kind of gone all in on this whole motherhood thing. And the timing of that, of course, for me personally, like did coincide like with the pandemic and with, a couple other life circumstances to where I could really recognize like I don't remember why I'm chasing some of these things that I am, or like what do I actually care about. And so I think I had at least enough like wherewithal to understand like I really needed to kind of regain this connection with myself as a human to then use that a little bit as a better compass for both being a mom and being a designer.
Yeah. And I use the word compass a lot as I start to talk about the sort of regaining sense of self, because we do some really specific practices around that. I give you 3 workbooks. You work through those. We talk about them in a session. Those are your values, your identity, your purpose, and the goal of that is to create like that new North Star, that new internal compass that says, this is who I am. This is what I want. This is what's important to me. This is where I'm headed. Those are really important questions that as human beings we need in order to make sure to kind of like calm down that piece of our brain that's always kind of wondering if we're on the right path. It's such a common
Totally.
question that I think we as moms have once we start having kids, just whether we're super conscious of it or not. There's this question that says, am I still doing the thing that I want to be doing right now? Am I headed in the direction I want to head now that I've just added this tiny human into my life? And answering that question, I think, is a really powerful, important exercise for all of us, so that we can, in fact, feel that sense of certainty, that sense of rightness, that sense of direction, that groundedness that we all want as we move along in life.
For sure. Yeah, that resonates so much. And I think like not to keep going back to it, but I think, it was a big circumstance was, I kind of achieved getting my what I would call like a pretty dream job or, like a great fit job right at the beginning of the pandemic. And that was right when my kid was 18 months old. And I think that built a lot of like really bad habits of parenting and trying to like perform at the same time, that resulted in like a lot of just like autopilot from there. And so to your point of like I had been on autopilot for too long. And I think a big catalyst of me coming into coaching was even this event of like my oldest daughter starting kindergarten, and suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, those years are gone. Her young childhood where I could have been doing XYZ differently or, optimizing or really like being more conscientious of the decisions I was making, like that's done now. And I think that's what really brought me to like, okay, I've got to resolve this. Like I've got to feel that sense of rightness and like understand the decisions I'm making better in order to like feel good about them.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that you mentioned, and I was kind of laughing about this as I was sharing it with you before we hit the record button here. But you mentioned to me that one of the things I said to you, I don't know if this was in our breakthrough call, if it was in one of our first sessions, but you had told me that you don't really have a problem with negative self talk, and well, I don't know. You tell me how you remember that moment that you said this to me and what I said to you. You tell me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think like we see it too in some of the other like work that we did together with like values and, some of like the general, I think like demeanor I try to bring to life in terms of like a certain lightness and optimism. And so I think yeah, channel that a lot outwardly. And then I
Sure.
know, yeah, as we started to talk to each other, and you were kind of citing that as like maybe a common symptom or something that, women in this position like might be struggling with. And me thinking like, oh, well, no, not really. Like can't think of any examples. And then as soon as we started to get into it,
I'm really positive. I'm really optimistic. Yeah, those were definitely
yeah.
your value, your identity. Like you're naturally that way for sure. And then I told you, yeah, but my guess is that it's pretty subtle, and you just haven't clued into it yet.
a
And you
hundred
probably wouldn't
percent.
believe me
And
at the time.
no, yeah, but like as soon as yeah, I think I was like, okay, sure, sure. But as soon
Whatever,
as we started
Rebecca. Okay.
unpacking it, and then yeah, but I think this is where that's just the power of self-awareness that comes through, like with putting a lot of work into coaching, because yeah, as soon as like even this like tiny example of kind of shoulding your life away, but like, oh, I should be doing this or I should be doing that, or why am I not doing enough of X? And then it was
Yeah.
just really like, oh no, this actually dominates my life. Like that dominates all of my
Mm.
thoughts and responsibilities around all the things I'm trying to balance.
Yeah. The shoulding is 100% a flavor of negative self-talk, right? And subversive negative self-talk, because it's telling your brain that you're not doing something, you're not meeting an expectation of some kind, whether that expectation is
Hmm.
is fair or not fair or societal or just, it doesn't really matter. It's just telling you that you're not meeting the mark. And that not meeting the mark, when you take it a couple of layers down, is you kind of saying, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not enough. It's all of those things. And why I'm curious why that was, as you started to clue into what your kind of very subliminal negative self-talk was, like, why was that important to you, and what happened as you started to clue into it?
Well, I think first of all, going back to like just the self awareness piece, but it's just like as soon as I even was able to start to cluing into it, I started to be able to see like the volume of it, and like how much that could show up in all manners of life. Cause I think it wasn't just, you know, motherhood or
Right.
career, but also like the
It wasn't
ways.
just big things. It wasn't like you failed on a project or you yelled at your kids, like these big moments. They were like, give us some examples of how subtle this was.
Yeah, totally. Like really subtle things of like, it's like really important for me to show up in my community or with like friends or neighbors in different ways. And so maybe, again, very subtly, but like beating myself up about like, oh, it was their birthday and I forgot to, say happy birthday or like give them,
Yeah.
some kind of note or whatever. I love to write cards and letters to people, and so like
Yeah.
I often have this like ongoing roster in my head of like, oh, this is a special date to like a loved one. I should send them a card. But like, when do I have time to write cards right now?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And so it's like all these things that I guess like I was having a hard time letting go of, where I wanted to be like doing things, that maybe I had more time for prior to, this particular chapter of life and like never having time for, and then just feeling bad about it in some ways, like always feeling like, well, there was problems with like I'm working too much or, XYZ too much. And yeah, I think it's all just additive to your point. Like it's not just big things, it's all the small paper cuts, I think, that just add
Little
up.
things. Yep. Oh, I should have put more broccoli on their plate. Maybe they would have eaten that if I had chosen that today. I should have lingered a
Right.
little longer at bedtime and did X, Y, or Z, or I shouldn't have. Yeah, I mean, we could call it almost second guessings of things. This kind of I could have, I should have, maybe if I had, and this questioning of all these little decisions. And we make thousands of decisions every day. And then like alone, we make thousands of decisions for ourselves. And then as parents, we make decisions on behalf of our kids. And there's thousands of decisions a day that we make, very tiny little decisions, right? Everything from an interaction to what Starbucks drink we're going to get is like 10 decisions right there. If it's going to be a tall or a grande or what kind of coffee or what kind of milk, we make all these decisions all day. And, and if we have this subtle piece in our brain that's constantly telling us, I'm not doing it right and I'm not doing enough and I should be doing it a different way, that starts to take its toll on us. How did you specifically notice it was taking a toll on you?
Yeah, I think it was just like this overwhelming sense of obligation, maybe, that was just like starting to break me down where, again, it's additive. It was coming up like for me over time in multiple ways. But I think also like looking at work, for example, within my job, even feeling like there were times when, one week I'd be like, I don't know if I can do this anymore, and like talking to my spouse about it. Yeah. And then the very next week, like things start going better. And I'm like, never mind, it's fine, and it was just like this really cyclical,
Yeah.
repetitive, pattern of like, I'm clearly not handling everything okay, or, like things are not well, but I couldn't break free of that cycle somehow. Like I just didn't know how to kind of like reset in some way. And I think I was really feeling burnout too. And I think that partially came from like this overwhelming sense of obligation over time, leading to like really not having made any time for myself and like going back to that first goal, like no wonder I lost my sense of self. Like I haven't been in touch with myself in approximately 6 years,
And you've been subtly like
So,
cutting yourself down, right? You've been chipping away at your confidence and like slowly making it smaller and smaller, telling yourself in very subtle ways all of the time, you're not meeting the mark. I'm not meeting the mark. I should
right,
be doing something
right.
different. I'm not meeting the mark. Over 6 years, tiny little, to your point, like paper cuts of that. You did that on your hand, you'd have a ripped up hand eventually over time if you were constantly cutting your hand like a paper cut with those kinds of comments, right? And so, really, really hard to find your sense of self, a groundedness in who you are if you're subtly undercutting yourself all of the time.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So then what did we do with that in coaching?
Yeah, I think some of the things that I guess were more of like, mm, I would say some of the most like key insights that I had gotten from coaching, like thinking through those goals. I think I'm glad that we started where we did. And I think the framing again of my goals as being like kind of the internal and external reflections of themselves, like internally, sense of self, what am I doing here on this earth, and then like externally, what is the playbook by which I manifest that? Like we started very much with the internal side, but you helped me work through a really interesting reframe that maybe you've gotten through this conversation so far already, even of like, I was very comfortable in kind of living in this like gray space and like not really necessarily like pinpointing some of these decisions that I needed to make or some of these feelings that I was feeling. And the switch from feeling like I'm not a very goal oriented person or, that I wasn't necessarily sure what I was chasing anymore, to then understanding like the parallels between that and what I think you called like values based living, but like understanding what my values were and like how those manifest kind of in my identity, like what really makes me tick and who I am and like the purpose that that brings to the world. I think that analysis of really like forcing myself to understand and document what I value and then starting to see how that shows up in all of these chapters of my life and also where it wasn't showing up. And like, no wonder I was feeling a little bit depleted because I wasn't investing all the way in the things that I think were important to me. So I think that was the place to start where we, really had a long time working together, I think through getting to something that sounds so simple, but took a lot of work to really unpack. I think that was like a good intro, I guess, into how we started to tackle some of that together.
Yeah. And as I start to think about this a little bit, the subtle kind of internal teardown that, that you are experiencing, that all of us experience, this like subtle negative self-talk, that that was your old self, or maybe an unhealthy version of yourself. We could even say valuing things that weren't important to you, valuing how everybody else thought about you, valuing needing to always be perfect, valuing needing to always be on time, valuing like some kind of sense of, I don't know, being something over here. And so then being able to put words to the values and your identity and your purpose and why you're here, and feel like you do that in a really powerful way and in a really clear way, you could start to see how that other voice that was sort of tearing you down was sort of living these other sets of values that you didn't want to live anymore, right? And I would imagine that some of those things, some of those voices kind of silenced immediately. Some of it did just because you named your compass over here and you named what was most important to you, and so that some of that little voice just kind of shut itself down, and then some of it didn't, right? It was habitual, and we had to kind of work through some of that as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's definitely true. And I think like part of what we had continued to work on from that also was helpful is like, working through a little bit more of the second goal, of like, what does balance actually mean and feel like within my life, like within the
Yeah,
context of these values. And I think that just helped to kind of create an even more refined lens of like where and how to achieve balance. If I was looking across like the things I value and where those show up already, like in the work that I do, or, what I'm already doing with like raising my children and, the times and efforts that I make in trying to really have them have like a magical childhood, I hope. So
yeah,
I started to see how, it was a good reflection point, I guess, for understanding like how these were already manifesting in ways that I just needed to nurture a bit
yeah,
more.
yeah. Let's talk a little bit of an example about that, because I love this idea. A lot of times people come to coaching, and we have this goal of kind of the regaining of self, that could be framed in a lot of different ways, but it really is this sense of regrounding yourself and who you are and what you want, right? In a very in a broad sense. And a lot of times people come to me and they feel like they're coming at it from zero, right? They have absolutely no idea. They're so far from what they think. They've never named it, but it just feels so far from who they are and what the life they're living. And then we actually get into it, and we realize that that's not actually true, right? That there are, in fact, there's lots of ways that you are on some level living into the life that you want to lead. And that's a really powerful moment to recognize that you're really not at zero. Maybe you're at five, maybe you're 50%. Now we're just increasing from 50% to 80%. And that's a completely different feeling, right? So I'm curious what were some of those things? Because I remember a couple of specific conversations around this where you kind of went, oh, I actually am closer than I think to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I identify even with, your intro part there of like feeling like I'm coming from zero or feeling like, oh my
I'm
gosh, I have
so
no idea,
lost. I'm
and
like,
then
I'm
so
not even on the
lost,
right
feeling
continent right now.
totally, totally. And then yet, and again, it took so much work to get to that kind of concise view of looking at myself in words on paper and then feeling like, oh, this feels like coming home, or like, duh, of course I
Yeah,
value these things, but like,
yeah,
how had I so lost sight of that? But no, going back to your question. So I remember, I think we had taken that and then started to reframe them into, yeah, like goals looking forward. And some of those goals were a little bit more, again, familiar or like obvious to me, like after we had kind of worked through it. And I was like, yeah, I know this. Like, I know I've always wanted to do this. So two examples being, I think I already used this term, but like, I love this notion of like filling my kids' childhoods with everyday magic, like putting investment in like the silliness and the joy. And like, that's just like so important to me. And then also on a career side, like being part of like really big, impactful, sustainable change. Like I like working on what we call in the design industry, like wicked problems, stuff like climate change or government services or, these things with like really broad scale, tangible impact, like really energizes me. And so it was fun to go through those goals with you. And I think like, again, understand how they were manifestations of my values. I think the thing though that was surprising and that you really helped me identify was this third goal that I don't think I ever would have called a goal before, but then I was like, oh, this also makes sense, but is to like build this really deep relationship, I think, with the natural world is how we had characterized it. But it was really important and has always been important to me. And like the peace that I get with like being in touch with nature and like having experiences outdoors is super important to me. And yet I hadn't really ever equated that as a goal or even a priority, to be fitting into like this everyday life routine. And we talked about that and like how simple it could be of even changing one of my morning walks a week to like go on a hike instead, or like somehow start to plan and cultivate these moments of, natural wonder with also like, excursions regularly or et cetera, so it's just like that was a good, I guess, also helpful reframe to think about how to even define what goals could really
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
in this phase of life.
And what we're just to connect it back to the compass, right? So we do this kind of compass work to define your values, your identity, your purpose. So that's what we call like that really core piece of who you are. And then we looked at that compass and we said, what are the goals from there? What is this? Where does this lead you? What is your compass telling you want to do, go after, be like in your life, right? And then that was where some of these real specificity of like the kind of childhood you want to give to your kids, nature being a piece of that, and these types of things started to be very clear to you, which you always kind of knew were important to you on some level. But then because we were able to trace it back to like this, why it is so meaningful to you, all of a sudden it took on a whole new importance. And you recognized that actually making time for those things was a huge piece of like refilling your bucket and living like very intentionally, where you're going to get to the end of your life and you're going to look back at these things that you're doing now and go, yeah, these were like really important to me. And I could tell you, like I could name the words for you that tells you why this was so important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's why, I mean, in my mind, it was so worth investing in, is because again, it's like, this is my life that we're talking about. And it's like my kids' lives and my relationship with my partner. And, just how to ensure, like, I've always had that deep seated fear of, having regrets or feeling like I didn't live life to the fullest or whatever. And so, yeah, I think everything you just said really resonates again, that it's just like, that's been powerful to know and to have, even as, I continue on my way after coaching, and going to my job and doing all the things. And then, if I start to feel out of touch or something, I have these very tangible artifacts to go back to and revisit and like noodle on that are
Yeah,
really centering, I think.
I love that. I want to talk just briefly about the the playbook. That's what it is. The playback. I think I wrote playback playbook because a lot of the things that we've talked about in this playbook are kind of fall into this category of like it's stuff that we do a little bit outside of the moment. It's like talking about the goals and talking about the things that are important to you, which you have to give your brain direction before you can really do anything with that. So that's still all a part of the playbook is naming your values and naming those goals and things. But then there's a piece of the playbook that's like I'm in the trenches of life, and I'm literally making decisions in my daily life to align with these things or not, for that matter. And so I'm curious about a tool that's in your playbook or play, if we're going to go with that, if we're going to go with that metaphor,
Hmm.
that you was really important to you or impactful to you, or one that you're still using at this point, even though we've been done with coaching for a couple of months at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I think I could think of two off the top of my head, like one being during the context of coaching. I think that I don't remember if you say TFAR or, thoughts, feelings, actions,
Yeah. Yep.
results kind of framework
Oh,
of
the
working through
model.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
UFA.
that model. Exactly. So that model though in particular, I thought was really profound, like during the context of coaching. I think going back to this notion of just like understanding thought patterns and understanding like how much everything else can be rooted in like a simple reframe,
Yeah.
and mindfulness, I guess, like within your
Yeah.
thought patterns. I think that was really powerful for me. Ongoing, post coaching, I think we talked a lot too about this notion of like the pivot moment, and like whenever you feel times of stress or under duress for some reason or another, and feeling maybe like a slight internal conflict. I think through coaching, I've gotten a little more mindful about like recognizing when that happens. And then we have, some real tools, I think, for then once you recognize it, like what works to get yourself out of that funk, like
Yeah.
what works to kind of reset that thought pattern, like we're talking about, and be like, okay, it's okay that I'm feeling this way, but now what do I do about it? And how can I
Yeah.
kind of like move away from this in a productive sense? And I think that's still definitely a work in progress. I think that's a lifelong challenge, really for everyone. It's not like we're
Yeah. Of
ever
course.
going to be just like completely smooth sailing. But I think it is helpful already to like be able to recognize it a bit more effectively and then also have some exercises and, ways of working in my back pocket that can help to get out of it.
Yeah. I love that. So, where how would you like describe life now that you've gone through this process, like in terms of how it's different than when we started?
Yeah. I think I have so much more of an appreciation just for like injecting fun into my own life, like not necessarily always worrying about making sure that I'm showing up for other people or trying to create, these moments fully just for my kids, but like really just thinking about like us as a family. Like, yeah, you can show up for work, you can show up for all of these different like responsibilities and roles in your life, but also like there's just like time for rest and time for relaxation and knowing that that's just as important as everything else on the list. And so I would say, like, this whole summer, even, after we had kind of wrapped up our coaching, like, it was so fun. We had so many outdoor adventures that really gave me a lot of energy and joy, you know, chasing the northern lights and kayaking like out to famous landmarks and Great Lakes and camping in the
Oh, good.
backyard and,
Yeah.
like all these things that it was just like, so worthwhile to put in that tiny bit of extra effort and maybe even like tiny bit of mindfulness to be like, you know what, on Sunday, like I'm not going to do laundry all day. We're going to get out and go do something and have fun. And I'll deal with laundry later. And that's fine. And it's still going to get done.
And you might have still done I just wanna make a quick point about this because I think you still might have done some of those fun adventures, but I think when you have the perspective, like, "I'm doing exactly what I wanna be doing. This is I wouldn't wanna be doing anything else. This is so aligned with who I am and the life I wanna lead and the mom I wanna be." When you have that energy while you're doing these activities, right? That the energy, the joy, the life, the motivation, everything internally just feels so heightened, right? In a positive way. And I think that's a huge difference is so often we a lot of us do things that in retrospect we want to be doing but we don't experience the joy of it because we don't connect to the deeper reasons why we're doing it, and the moment we actually name it and give ourselves that kind of empowered perspective, it changes the entire energy behind it.
100%. And I think that's a really good point to kind of encapsulate this whole experience in that, and we've talked about this before, but like externally, you would not know that any of my circumstances have changed. Like
Yeah, through
I am
coaching
still at the
nothing
same
is like
job.
circumstantially
I
changed.
still like literally, yeah, literally nothing is different. Like I am doing the exact same thing I was doing 1 year ago in the same place with the same stuff. And yet I think it speaks to that point that you just made for sure of just like understanding and also letting go of the guilt. Like I think we talked a lot about personal life there just now, but professionally too, just understanding like, no, I do this because actually I really enjoy it and I'm good at it. And it provides for my family. And it's okay if like I send my kids to daycare because I'm going to be really present and focused with them as soon as they're home. But I can like go to work and enjoy it and feel okay about it, which is really, yeah,
It's
it's a
so
good reset.
Yep, I love it. Well, let's close with this because I love that you wrote this to me as we were kind of going back and forth and putting down some notes about this episode. You said all working moms need to hear is that we're doing a freaking good job. And yet that's so hard to internalize. You know, a lot of us hear it and yet the internalization of it is like a whole nother thing. So give us some wisdom on how we internalize this, Stefanie.
I think, yeah, I mean, if I had a nickel, for every time you hear that kind of thing from
Yeah.
someone somewhere, in pop culture, and it's like, okay, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, you rolled your eyes and go, I get it.
Yeah, sure. But I think it goes back to, I mean, some of the things that you were saying of, I think that by building this self-awareness and understanding like what you really are all about, and then starting to notice how like you're showing up that way in so many of these avenues of life, you're role modeling that for your kids, just like being in touch, I think, with who you are and having everyone be able to just like really embrace that about themselves and just live life by their terms, then it like starts to just like have ripple effects of that joy and of that intentionality around like how you're doing, you know, anything in your life, I guess, across like the career ladder or in a personal way. I think it just like has, yeah, it has a huge impact all the way across. I don't know how to get people to internalize it for themselves, but I think the short story of that is that you really probably just have to do the work, and really just start to understand. And I really can now appreciate, I think, a little bit more of the importance of mindfulness by
Sure.
having done that work myself, versus just like hearing about it and, wondering what the secret sauce was, but maybe not necessarily having experienced it firsthand.
Yep. And that work that you're talking about for you, you chose to do that in coaching and you chose to give yourself a container of space with somebody that was going to guide you through it. Obviously, you could do that in other ways too. But I think coaching is one of the most effective ways. And my guess is at this point, you'd probably say something very similar, like the idea of really giving yourself that level of intentionality, accountability, expertise in somebody guiding you. It's way better than doing it on your own. If you'd ever get there.
Totally. Yeah. And I think like, attending therapy or, other types of like mental health care is like 100% also a great method and like maybe complementary as well. But I think like the forward focus of coaching and like really that kind of particular vantage point that coaching takes, I think is really helpful with these types of questions that you're grappling with.
Yeah, absolutely. We could keep talking forever here. This has been so fun to chat with you. Stefanie, thank you for taking the time and putting some thought into this and just sharing your experience and wisdom. So good.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me. I really hope I wanted to share because, I felt like there are a lot of women out there that are probably feeling these similar things. And so if this helps, anyone with kind of taking whatever that next step is for themselves in terms of, just feeling that balance and feeling good about all the things they're doing. Cause again, they're probably doing a great freaking job and they need to know that. So
Yes, you
happy to
are.
be
I
here.
love it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So good. All right, working moms, until next week, let's get to it. The next step to getting unstuck and having more days where you bounce out of bed feeling certain that you're doing exactly what you want to be doing, regaining your confidence, ending all of that negative chatter in your head, is to book a free breakthrough call. This is a strategy call where I will guide you through setting a vision for the life that you want to lead as a working mom, and then I'll lay out a plan for exactly how we will achieve that together through one-on-one coaching. You can book that call by going to RebeccaOlsonCoaching.com/book. All right, working moms, let's get to it.